Los Angeles, California, September 1968. A private gym in Beverly Hills. Chuck Norris is setting up training equipment when Steve McQueen, the biggest movie star in the world, walks through the door and says, "I need you to teach me some moves for my next film." Nothing real, just stuff that looks good on camera. What happens in the next 15 minutes doesn't just change Steve McQueen's mind about martial arts. It changes how Hollywood understands the difference between fighting for cameras and fighting for survival, creates a friendship that lasts decades, and proves that real skill can't be faked no matter how good an actor you are. The gym is exclusive, members only, located on the second floor of a building on Wilshire Boulevard. This is where Hollywood's elite come to train when they don't want paparazzi, when they don't want fans, when they want actual work instead of celebrity circus. The space is clean, functional, no mirrors for posing, no juice bar, no social scene, just mats, bags, weights, and serious people doing serious training. The walls are white, the floors are hardwood, windows face north providing even natural light all day. The air smells like leather and sweat, and the particular silence of people focused on improvement rather than performance. It's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Chuck is here because Bob Wall, his friend and fellow martial artist, rented the space for private training sessions. Bob teaches movie stars and executives, people who want real instruction without spectators, people willing to pay premium rates for privacy and quality. Bob called Chuck yesterday, said he has a client who specifically requested Chuck Norris, said this client saw Chuck at Ed Parker's tournament and was impressed by his speed and precision. Chuck doesn't know who the client is. Doesn't matter. Chuck treats every student the same, whether they're a janitor or a CEO, whether they're paying or training for free, whether they have talent or struggle with basics. His job is to teach what works, to help people understand their bodies, to show them what's possible with dedication and proper technique. Chuck is 28 years old, competition record 183 wins, 10 losses, 2 draws, currently holding the professional middleweight karate champion title, running 3 successful martial arts schools in California, teaching 6 days a week, training champions, building a reputation as not just a fighter but an instructor who understands how to break down complex movements into teachable components. He's not famous outside martial arts circles, not yet, but people in the community know his name, know his record, know he's the real deal. The door opens. Steve McQueen walks in. The Steve McQueen, star of The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, Bullets still in theaters breaking box office records, the coolest man in America, maybe the world. Women want him, men want to be him. He drives race cars professionally, rides motorcycles, does his own stunts, embodies masculine confidence that seems effortless and natural. Steve is 38 years old, 5'10", 165 pounds, fit but not bulky, moves with that movie star grace that comes from years of physical awareness on camera, knowing where your body is in space, knowing how to make movement look natural under lights. He's wearing simple workout clothes, gray sweatpants, white t-shirt, no designer labels, no flash, just functional gear. His face is famous, that crooked smile, those blue eyes, that presence that translates through film into charisma. Chuck stands, extends his hand. Steve shakes it, firm grip, direct eye contact, no movie star condescension, no superiority, just 2 men meeting. Steve says, "You're Chuck Norris. Bob speaks highly of you." Chuck says, "Bob's a good friend and a great martial artist." Steve nods, looks around the gym, assessing, then says directly, "I have a film starting production in 3 months. Action role. I need to learn some martial arts moves. Nothing complicated, just stuff that looks real on camera. Can you teach me some choreography?" Chuck pauses. The question isn't insulting, but it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding. Steve thinks martial arts is performance art, thinks it's dance with aggressive aesthetics, thinks Chuck's job is to teach him how to fake combat convincingly. This is common with actors. They want the appearance of skill without the years of actual development, want to look dangerous without being dangerous, want audience belief without personal transformation. Chuck says carefully, "I can teach you martial arts, but martial arts isn't choreography. It's a fighting system designed for real combat. What you do with that knowledge in films is up to you and your directors, but I can only teach you what's real." Steve's smile shifts slightly, becoming less certain. He says, "Look, I appreciate the philosophy, but I'm an actor, not a fighter. I need to look convincing, not be convincing. Teach me the moves that look good." Chuck nods slowly, makes a decision, says, "Okay, but first help me understand what you mean by looks good. Show me a move you think looks good on camera." Steve seems surprised by the request but recovers quickly. He drops into what he thinks is a fighting stance, something he learned on previous films, something directors told him looked tough. His feet are too wide, his weight too far back, his hands positioned for appearance rather than function. He throws a punch, pulls it cinematically, the kind of fake strike that works when the camera captures it from the right angle with the right editing. Chuck watches without expression. When Steve finishes, Chuck asks, "Does that feel powerful?" Steve says, "It looks powerful on film. That's what matters." Chuck says, "May I show you something?" Steve gestures, "Go ahead." Chuck steps into the same stance Steve just demonstrated. From the outside it looks similar, but Chuck asks Steve to push him, to test his stability. Steve pushes Chuck's shoulder. Chuck doesn't move. Rooted, balanced, structure sound. Then Chuck adjusts his stance to exactly what Steve showed, the movie version, the appearance without substance. He tells Steve to push again. Steve pushes. Chuck stumbles backward easily, the stance having no structural integrity, looking tough, but being functionally weak. Steve's expression changes, interest replacing casual dismissal. Chuck says, "Your stance looks good to people who don't know what they're looking at, but anyone with real training sees immediately that it's fake. And more importantly, if you ever needed to actually defend yourself, you'd be vulnerable." Steve says slowly, "So you're saying I need to learn real martial arts to look real?" Chuck says, "I'm saying you can't fake real skill. Audiences might not consciously know what's real versus what's choreographed, but they feel it. They sense when movement is genuine versus performed. If you want to look truly dangerous on screen, you need to actually develop dangerous skills." The camera captures truth more than directors realize. Steve is quiet for a moment, then says, "Show me what real looks like." Chuck says, "I'll need you to attack me. Actually try to hit me. Not pull the punch, not fake it. Commit to the strike." Steve looks uncertain, says, "I don't want to hurt you." Chuck smiles slightly, says, "You won't, but you need to try, or this demonstration doesn't work." Steve sets himself, throws a real punch, not movie version, actual committed strike aiming for Chuck's face. Fast, backed by his weight, genuine attempt. Chuck moves, not dramatically, not with flourish, just 6 inches to the side, minimal movement, creating maximum effect. The punch passes where Chuck's head was. Chuck's hand rises, intercepts Steve's extended arm, redirects it gently downward, using Steve's own momentum against him. Steve's balance breaks. He stumbles forward half a step, recovers, looks at Chuck with new eyes. Chuck says, "Again, but this time I'll show you what I could do if this was real combat." Steve attacks again, same punch, same commitment. Chuck moves the same way, 6 inches offline, but this time his counter is different. His hand doesn't just redirect Steve's arm, it continues the motion, controlling Steve's elbow, pulling him off balance, simultaneously stepping behind Steve's lead leg, sweeping it. Steve goes down, not hard. Chuck controls the descent, but suddenly Steve is on the mat looking up, unclear how he got there. The whole sequence taking less than 2 seconds. Chuck extends a hand, helps Steve up. Steve is breathing harder now, not from exertion but from realization. He says, "Jesus, I didn't even see that coming." Chuck says, "That's because I didn't telegraph it." No wind-up, no preparation, no movie pause. Real fighting is about economy of motion, about making your opponent commit while you stay flexible, about using their force against them. What works on camera usually doesn't work in reality, and what works in reality often looks boring on camera until you understand what you're watching. Steve brushes himself off, says, "Okay, I'm listening, really listening now. Teach me real martial arts, not movie martial arts." Chuck says, "It'll take more than 15 minutes. Steve says, "I've got time. I'll make time. This is more important than I thought." Chuck nods, says, "Then we start with basics. Stance, footwork, breathing, understanding how your body generates power. Not exciting, not flashy, but foundation for everything else." For the next hour, Chuck breaks down fundamental concepts Steve never considered. How weight distribution affects speed and power. How tension reduces effectiveness while relaxed readiness increases response time. How timing matters more than strength in most situations. How real fights are chaotic and unpredictable, nothing like choreographed sequences. Steve absorbs it like a sponge, asking questions, trying movements, failing, adjusting, improving incrementally. At one point Steve says, "This is harder than any role I've prepared for. Acting you can fake with talent and camera tricks. This you can't fake. Your body either can do it or can't." Chuck says, "Exactly.
That's why real martial artists spend decades perfecting techniques, not for performance, for capability. The performance is byproduct of genuine skill, not the goal. When the session ends, both men are sweating, Steve more than Chuck. Steve says, "I came here thinking I'd learn some cool moves for my movie. Instead, you destroyed my entire understanding of what fighting is." Chuck says, "Good. That means you're ready to actually learn." Steve says, "I want to train with you seriously. Not just for this film but ongoing. How often can we meet?" Chuck says he trains Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings before his school opens. Steve says he'll be there, rearranges his entire schedule, shows up every session for the next 6 months, doesn't miss once, brings the same intensity to training that made him a movie star, but now channeled into genuine skill development rather than appearance management. Other students at Chuck's school don't recognize him at first because he's not performing. He's working, head down, focused on improvement, treating Chuck not as a hired instructor but as a master teaching valuable knowledge. Their friendship deepens. Steve invites Chuck to race car events. Chuck teaches Steve advanced techniques. They train together, push each other, develop mutual respect based not on fame or achievement but on shared commitment to excellence, to doing things right, to refusing to accept appearance as substitute for substance. Steve starts recommending Chuck to other actors, tells them, "Don't hire him if you want to look tough. Hire him if you want to actually be tough. There's a difference." 2 years later, Steve is filming Le Mans. During a racing scene, another car loses control, crashes into Steve's vehicle. Steve gets trapped, fuel leaking, fire starting. In the chaos, Steve uses techniques Chuck taught him about staying calm under pressure, about controlled breathing, about efficient movement in confined spaces. He extricates himself before fire reaches the fuel tank. Later he tells Chuck, "That training saved my life. Not the punching, the mental control. The discipline you taught me about not panicking, about thinking clearly when everything's chaos. That's what got me out." Chuck says, "That's what martial arts really is. Not fighting, but developing yourself to handle whatever comes." The physical techniques are just tools for building that internal capability. Steve says, "I wish more people understood that. They see martial arts in movies and think it's about looking badass. Real martial arts is about becoming capable, prepared, disciplined. Looking badass is just side effect." Steve continues training with Chuck for years. When Bruce Lee cast Chuck in Return of the Dragon, Steve is excited for his friend, says Chuck deserves the exposure, deserves recognition beyond martial arts circles. When Chuck starts getting his own action films, Steve gives advice about dealing with Hollywood, about maintaining integrity when studios want you to compromise, about staying true to what you know while navigating an industry built on illusion. In 1980, Steve McQueen dies of cancer at age 50. Chuck attends the funeral, sees hundreds of people mourning the movie star, the icon, the legend. But Chuck mourns the student, the friend, the man who showed up 3 mornings a week for years not because he had to, but because he wanted to improve, wanted to learn, wanted to become more than his image. After the funeral, Steve's wife approaches Chuck, hands him a letter. Steve wrote it weeks before dying, specifically for Chuck. In it, Steve writes about that first day in the gym, about walking in thinking he'd learn some movie tricks, and instead getting his entire worldview shifted. He writes that Chuck taught him the difference between seeming and being, between performance and reality, between image and substance. He writes that those lessons extended far beyond martial arts into every aspect of his life, made him a better actor because he understood truth, made him a better man because he understood discipline, made him a better husband and father because he understood the value of genuine presence versus performed attention. The letter ends, "I came to you wanting to fake martial arts. You refused to teach me how to fake anything. You insisted I learn real skills. That insistence changed my life. Thank you for refusing to accept anything less than genuine from me, even when I was willing to settle for less from myself. You showed me that real recognizes real, and everything else is just Hollywood." Chuck keeps the letter. Decades later, when people ask about Steve McQueen, Chuck tells this story. Not about the movie star, about the student, about the man who came looking for choreography and left with transformation. About 15 minutes that shifted from teach me moves to teach me truth. About a friendship built not on fame but on mutual respect for genuine skill over manufactured image. So here's the question. What are you faking that you could make real? Where are you settling for appearance instead of substance? Where could you stop performing and start actually being? Because Steve McQueen, the coolest man in Hollywood, the guy who could fake anything on camera, chose to stop faking when it came to martial arts, chose to learn truth over image, chose to develop real capability over convincing performance. And that choice, made in 15 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon in 1968, echoed through the rest of his life and beyond his death. What will your choice to pursue truth over image create? Who will you become when you stop faking and start being real? Because Chuck Norris refused to teach Steve McQueen how to fake martial arts, and that refusal became a gift that lasted decades. What gift will you receive when someone refuses to let you settle for less than genuine?